The alarm went off at 6 in the morning, but Derek was already awake. He'd been lying there for the past 20 minutes, mentally running through his checklist for the day. Today was the day he'd finally tackle the garage sale he'd been planning for almost 2 months now. His mother had passed away 6 months ago, and her house had been sitting there filled with a lifetime of memories and belongings. He'd already kept what meant the most to him, but there was still so much left. Good stuff too. Furniture that was barely used. Kitchen appliances still in their boxes, books, decorations, and all sorts of things that someone else could really use. He rolled out of bed and headed straight for the shower. The plan was simple. Get everything set up early. Catch the serious garage sale people who wake up at dawn to hunt for treasures, and hopefully clear out as much as possible before the afternoon heat made everything miserable. He'd learned from watching YouTube videos that the early bird shoppers were the ones who actually bought stuff. They knew what they were looking for and came with cash ready. By 7 o'clock, Derek was backing his truck into the driveway. He'd loaded it up the night before with tables, and now he just needed to set everything up and start bringing out the items. The neighborhood was quiet, exactly how he liked it. A few joggers passed by and one of them waved. He waved back. He didn't know most of his neighbors yet. He'd only moved into this place about 8 months ago, right before his mom got really sick. The timing had been awful, but at least he'd been close enough to help her in those final months. The tables went up quickly. Derek had borrowed 6 folding tables from his office, and he arranged them in a neat U-shape along the driveway. Everything was completely on his property. He'd been careful about that. He'd even measured to make sure nothing spilled onto the sidewalk or the grass strip that technically belonged to the city. The last thing he needed was some actual violation to deal with. Then came the fun part. Bringing out all the items and arranging them so they looked appealing. His mom had always been big on presentation. She used to say that people buy with their eyes first, so Derek took his time, grouping similar items together, making sure price tags were visible and arranging everything so it looked organized rather than like a jumbled mess. Kitchen stuff on one table, books and decorations on another, small furniture pieces displayed prominently. He'd even brought out his mom's old record player and set up a small collection of vinyl records beside it. By 8 o'clock, he was ready. He put out his handmade signs at the end of the driveway with prices clearly marked. Cash only, everything must go. His phone was charged in case someone wanted to Venmo or use a payment app, but he was really hoping people would just bring cash. It made everything simpler. The first customer showed up at 8:15. An older gentleman in a pickup truck who made a beeline straight for the tools. Derek had a whole box of his mom's late husband's old tools. They'd been sitting in her garage for years, barely touched. The man examined each one carefully, testing the weight, checking for rust. After about 10 minutes of careful inspection, he offered $40 for the entire box. Derek had been hoping for $60, but the man was friendly and seemed like he'd actually used them, so he agreed. $40, and the day hadn't even really started yet. More people started showing up. A young couple looking for furniture for their first apartment. They bought a small bookshelf and a coffee table. A woman with 3 kids who grabbed a bunch of the kitchen appliances. 2 college students who got excited about the record player and spent 20 minutes going through every single vinyl record, eventually buying the player and 15 records. Derek found himself actually enjoying the interactions. People would share little stories about why they needed something or what memories an item brought back for them. It felt good, knowing these things were going to new homes where they'd be appreciated. By 10:30, Derek had made over $300, and he'd cleared out probably a third of what he'd brought out. The weather was perfect, not too hot yet, with a light breeze that made everything comfortable. A few neighbors he'd never spoken to before stopped by just to chat. One lady from down the street bought a set of dishes and mentioned she'd been meaning to introduce herself for months. Another neighbor, a guy around Derek's age, didn't buy anything but stayed for 15 minutes talking about the neighborhood and recommending a good pizza place nearby. Everything was going smoothly. Better than smoothly, actually. Derek was starting to think he might actually sell most of this stuff and not have to make multiple trips to the donation center like he'd been dreading. He was helping a customer load a chair into their car when he noticed someone walking across the street toward him. Not walking, actually. More like marching. With purpose. The woman was probably in her late 50s, wearing a sun visor and carrying what looked like a folder. She had that expression on her face, the one that said she was about to make something her business that really wasn't her business at all. Derek had seen that look before in his line of work. He felt his stomach tighten a little bit, but he kept his pleasant expression and finished helping his customer secure the chair in their trunk. The woman was standing at the edge of his driveway by the time he turned around, and she was looking at everything with narrowed eyes. Not like she was interested in buying anything, more like she was inspecting it and finding it lacking. "Good morning," Derek said, giving her his friendly customer service voice. "Can I help you find something?" She didn't smile back. Instead, she opened her folder and pulled out some papers. "Are you the homeowner?" "I am," Derek replied, his friendly tone staying steady even though he could feel where this was going. "I'm Linda Patterson. I'm on the HOA board." She said it like those words should mean something significant. "I've received complaints about this sale." Derek glanced around. There were currently 3 people browsing his tables, none of them being loud or disruptive. His setup was neat and organized. All the cars were parked legally on the street. He'd been careful about every single detail. "Complaints?" he asked. "About what specifically?" Linda pulled out a piece of paper and held it up. "According to the HOA bylaws, any garage sale or yard sale requires written permission from the board submitted at least 30 days in advance. You didn't submit any such request." Derek felt a flash of irritation but kept it off his face. He'd spent hours going through the HOA documents when he bought this place. He'd read every single page of the CC&Rs, the bylaws, all of it. He'd specifically looked up rules about garage sales because he knew this day was coming. "I reviewed the HOA documents pretty carefully," Derek said calmly. "I didn't see any requirement like that. I also checked with the county, and there's no permit needed for a personal garage sale." Linda's lips pressed into a thin line. "Well, I'm telling you right now that it's required, and you're in violation. You need to shut this down immediately, or you'll be facing fines of $500 per day. $500 per day. Derek almost laughed at the absurdity of it, but he kept his composure. A couple of his customers had stopped browsing and were watching the interaction now. "I appreciate you bringing this to my attention," Derek said, still keeping his tone professional. "But I'm going to need to see where exactly that's written in the bylaws. Because like I said, I read through everything pretty thoroughly." Linda's face flushed slightly. She wasn't used to being questioned, that much was obvious. "I don't need to show you anything. I'm on the board and I'm telling you this is the rule. Now shut it down or I'll be forced to take further action." Derek stood there looking at this woman who thought she could just make up rules and expect everyone to follow them. He could feel his patience wearing thin. But he also knew exactly how to handle people like this. He'd dealt with far worse in his career. "I'm not shutting anything down," he said firmly but politely. "I'm not violating any actual laws or regulations. If you believe I am, you're welcome to call whoever you need to call. But I'm going to continue with my sale." Linda's eyes widened like she couldn't believe someone was actually standing up to her. She fumbled with her phone, pulling it out of her pocket with shaking hands. "Fine," she snapped. "I'm calling the authorities. We'll see what they have to say about your illegal operation here." She stepped back, phone to her ear, and Derek could hear her speaking in a loud, dramatic voice about an illegal commercial operation and someone disturbing the peace. He sighed quietly and turned back to his customers who were staring at him with wide eyes. "Sorry about that, folks," he said with an apologetic smile. "Just some neighborhood drama. Everything's fine. Please keep browsing." But in the back of his mind, Derek was already preparing for what came next. He knew his rights, he knew the law, and he definitely knew how to handle a situation like this. Linda Patterson had no idea who she'd just picked a fight with. Linda stood about 15 feet away, still on her phone, speaking loud enough that Derek and everyone else could hear every word. She was clearly putting on a performance, making sure he knew exactly what she was doing. "Yes, officer. I need to report an illegal commercial operation in our residential neighborhood," she said, her voice dripping with urgency. "There's a man here running what appears to be some kind of business out of his driveway. Multiple vehicles, constant traffic, complete disregard for our community standards." Derek felt his jaw tighten, but he forced himself to stay calm. He'd learned a long time ago that losing your cool never helped anything. It just gave the other person ammunition. So instead of responding, he turned his attention back to the young woman who'd been looking at a set of mixing bowls before Linda showed up. "Those are really great bowls," Derek said, keeping his voice friendly. "My mom never even used them. They've been sitting in the box for probably 3 years. The woman smiled nervously, glancing over at Linda. How much? $10 for the whole set? I'll take them, she said quickly, handing him a crumpled $10 bill and practically speed-walking back to her car with the bowls. Derek couldn't blame her. Linda's presence had changed the entire atmosphere from pleasant to awkward and tense. Linda ended her call and marched back over, that folder still clutched in her hand like it was some kind of legal weapon. The authorities are on their way. I suggest you start packing this up right now if you know what's good for you. Derek took a slow breath. Linda, right? Mrs. Patterson, she corrected sharply. Mrs. Patterson, Derek said, keeping his tone even. I understand you have concerns, but I'm not doing anything illegal. This is a personal garage sale on my own property. I'm not running a business. These are items from my late mother's estate. I don't care what your excuse is, Linda shot back. Rules are rules. This neighborhood has standards and we enforce them. You can't just move in here and think you can do whatever you want. A middle-aged man who'd been looking at some garden tools cleared his throat. Ma'am, he's not bothering anyone. I live 2 streets over and we have garage sales all the time. Linda whirled on him. Were you speaking to me? The man held up his hands. Just saying seems like a lot of fuss over nothing. This doesn't concern you, Linda snapped. This is an HOA matter. The man shook his head, put down the tools he'd been examining, and walked away. Derek watched another potential sale disappear. He could feel his frustration building, but he knew showing it would only make things worse. People like Linda fed off conflict. They wanted you to get upset so they could point at you and say, "See, I told you they were problematic." Mrs. Patterson, Derek tried again. I'm happy to discuss this with the HOA board at your next meeting, but right now, I'm going to continue with my sale. If the police come and tell me I'm violating a law, then I'll deal with that. But I'm not shutting down based on rules that I don't believe actually exist. Linda's face went red, actually red like a tomato. How dare you? I've been on this board for 12 years. I know these rules inside and out. Then show me, Derek said simply. Show me in the bylaws where it says I need 30 days notice for a garage sale. Linda's hands shook as she flipped through her folder. Derek watched as she scanned page after page, her expression growing more frustrated by the second. He already knew what she'd find. Nothing, because that rule didn't exist. He'd spent an entire evening reading through those documents with a highlighter, specifically looking for anything that might affect his plans for today. It's in here somewhere, Linda muttered, still flipping through pages. I know it is. Maybe you're thinking of a different rule? Derek suggested. Or maybe it's something the board discussed but never actually voted on. Don't patronize me, Linda snapped, slamming her folder shut. I don't need to prove anything to you. The police will sort this out. 2 more customers had wandered over during the argument, looked at the tension and promptly left without even browsing. Derek sighed. At this rate, Linda was going to cost him more sales than he'd made all morning. But he wasn't going to be bullied into shutting down. Not when he'd done everything by the book. A car slowed down in front of the house, and for a second, Derek thought the police had arrived already. But it was just a neighbor from across the street, an elderly man Derek had seen a few times but never spoken to. The man rolled down his window. Everything all right over there, son? Linda answered before Derek could. Everything's fine, Harold. Just dealing with someone who thinks rules don't apply to them. Harold looked at Derek's setup, then back at Linda. Looks like a garage sale to me. Used to have those all the time before. He trailed off, glancing at Linda. Well, before certain people decided we couldn't. That's not what happened, Linda said defensively. We simply implemented reasonable restrictions to maintain property values. Harold snorted. Right, anyway, hang in there, young man. Looks like you've got some good stuff. He drove off, and Derek felt a small surge of gratitude for the support, even if it was just a passing comment. Harold doesn't speak for the board, Linda said, her voice tight. He's just a bitter old man who got voted down on some proposals years ago. Derek didn't respond. There was no point. Linda had made up her mind about how this was going to go, and nothing he said would change that. So he busied himself straightening items on the tables, reorganizing a few things that had gotten shuffled around. 2 teenagers walked up, looked at Linda's angry face, and veered away. Another lost sale. Time seemed to crawl. Linda stood there like a sentinel, arms crossed, occasionally checking her phone. She wasn't leaving. She was going to stand there and wait for the police to arrive so she could be part of the drama she'd created. Derek recognized the type. She probably got a thrill from this, from wielding what she thought was power over someone else. You know, Linda said after a few minutes of silence, I looked you up in the HOA directory. You've only been here 8 months. Barely any time at all. You haven't come to a single board meeting. You haven't participated in any neighborhood events. And now here you are causing problems. Derek stopped organizing and looked at her. My mother was dying. I moved here to take care of her. I didn't have time for meetings or events. I was spending every spare moment at the hospital or at her place, trying to make sure she was comfortable in her final months. So excuse me if I wasn't prioritizing HOA meetings. Something flickered in Linda's expression. Guilt, maybe? Or discomfort, but it vanished quickly, replaced by that same rigid determination. I'm sorry for your loss, but that doesn't give you a free pass to ignore the rules. I'm not ignoring rules, Derek said, his patience finally starting to fray. I'm following the actual rules, the ones that are written down, not the made-up ones you're trying to enforce, and they're not made up. Then show me. They were both raising their voices now, and Derek immediately regretted it. This was exactly what he'd been trying to avoid. Getting into a shouting match with an HOA board member in his own driveway. Real professional. He took a breath and lowered his voice. Look, let's just wait for the police to get here. If they say I'm breaking the law, I'll shut down. Fair enough. Linda seemed satisfied with that. Fine, but you're still going to face HOA fines for this stunt. We'll see about that, Derek muttered. They stood there in uncomfortable silence for another 10 minutes. A few brave souls still wandered over to browse, and Derek managed to make a couple more small sales, but the vibe was completely killed. This was supposed to be a nice, simple garage sale. A way to clear out his mom's stuff and maybe meet some neighbors. Instead, it had turned into whatever this was. Finally, Derek spotted the police car turning onto his street. His stomach did a little flip, even though he knew he hadn't done anything wrong. There was something about seeing police lights even when you're innocent that triggered a nervous response. The car pulled up slowly, parking on the street a few houses down. 2 officers got out, and Linda immediately started walking toward them, waving her arms like she was flagging down a rescue helicopter. Derek stayed where he was, forcing himself to look calm and collected. He watched as Linda gestured animatedly, pointing at his setup, clearly giving them her version of events. One of the officers was nodding, jotting something down in a notepad. The other was looking past Linda, studying Derek's driveway setup with what looked like mild curiosity rather than concern. After what felt like an eternity but was probably only a minute or two, both officers started walking toward Derek with Linda trailing behind them like a puppy who'd brought them a prize. Derek straightened up, took another deep breath, and prepared himself for what he knew was going to be an interesting conversation. At least the police would be reasonable. They had to be. He wasn't breaking any laws. But as they got closer, Derek noticed Linda had this satisfied smirk on her face, like she'd already won, like she couldn't wait to watch the police shut down his sale and prove her right in front of the whole neighborhood. She had no idea what was coming. The first officer was tall, probably in his mid-30s, with the kind of build that suggested he spent time in the gym. The second was older, maybe late 40s, with gray starting to show at his temples. They both had that professional cop demeanor, neutral expressions that gave nothing away. Derek had seen it 1,000 times before. Good morning, the taller officer said as they approached. I'm Officer Chen, this is Officer Rodriguez. We got a call about a disturbance? Linda jumped in immediately. Yes, thank you for coming so quickly. This man is running an illegal commercial operation out of his driveway. No permits, no permission from the HOA board. Complete disregard for our neighborhood regulations. Officer Chen glanced at Derek's setup, then back at Linda. This looks like a garage sale to me, ma'am. Exactly, Linda said as if he'd just proven her point. And garage sales require HOA approval submitted 30 days in advance, plus proper permits from the county. He has neither. Officer Rodriguez pulled out a small notepad. Sir, are you the homeowner? I am, Derek replied calmly. Can I see some identification, please? Of course. Derek reached for his wallet, very deliberately keeping his movements slow and visible. He'd learned that lesson early in his career. Never make sudden movements around police officers, even when you're innocent. Especially when you're innocent, because misunderstandings could escalate fast. He pulled out his driver's license and handed it over. Officer Rodriguez examined it, then typed something into the radio clipped to his shoulder. Derek could hear the faint crackling response but couldn't make out the words. Standard procedure. They were running his information, making sure he was who he said he was and checking for any warrants or issues. "And this is your current address?" Rodriguez asked. "Yes, sir. I moved in about 8 months ago." Officer Chen was walking around the driveway looking at the setup. He checked the placement of the tables, noting that everything was within the property lines. He glanced at the street where several cars were parked, all of them legally positioned. He even checked the sidewalk to make sure nothing was blocking pedestrian access. Linda followed him like a shadow. "You can see how disruptive this is. All these people coming and going. The traffic. It's completely unacceptable in a residential neighborhood." "Ma'am," Officer Chen said patiently, "I need you to step back, please. Let us do our job." Linda huffed but took a few steps back, arms crossed tightly over her chest. Officer Rodriguez was still studying Derek's license. "So what exactly is going on here, Mr. Thompson?" Derek noticed he'd used his last name. The radio check must have come back. "I'm having a garage sale. These are items from my late mother's estate. She passed away 6 months ago and I've been clearing out her house. I checked the county regulations before I set this up. There's no permit required for a personal garage sale. I also reviewed my HOA documents and there's no restriction on garage sales in the CCNRs." "He's lying," Linda interjected. "It's absolutely in there. I've been on the board for 12 years. Officer Rodriguez held up a hand. "Ma'am, please." "Let him finish," Derek continued. "Everything is on my property, nothing blocking the sidewalk or street. I've been out here since 8 this morning, and I haven't had any complaints from anyone except Mrs. Patterson. Because I'm the only one paying attention," Linda practically shouted. "Everyone else is too afraid to say anything, but someone has to maintain standards around here." Officer Chen walked back over. "Sir, I've checked everything. You're not blocking any public access, no fire hazards I can see. All vehicles are legally parked on the street. As far as I can tell, there's no municipal violation here. What about the HOA rules?" Linda demanded. "Ma'am," Officer Chen said, and Derek could hear the patience wearing thin in his voice. "HOA disputes are civil matters. We don't enforce HOA rules. That's between residents and their HOA board. But he doesn't have a permit. There's no permit required for a personal garage sale in this county," Officer Rodriguez said firmly. "I can confirm that. As long as it's not a regular occurrence being used as a business, there's no violation of county ordinance." Linda's face was getting red again. "This is ridiculous. I called you here to do something about this." "We are doing something," Officer Chen said. "We're determining whether any laws are being broken, and they're not." Derek felt a wave of relief wash over him, but he kept his expression neutral. He knew this wasn't over. Linda looked like she was about to explode. Officer Rodriguez was still holding Derek's license, looking at it more closely now. His eyebrows went up slightly and he glanced at Derek's face, then back at the license. "Derek Thompson," he said slowly. "You work for the county, right?" Derek nodded. "I do." There was a pause and Derek could see the recognition dawning on Rodriguez's face. The older officer tilted his head slightly. "Wait, Derek Thompson, you're Ada Thompson? From the district attorney's office?" "Yes, sir," Derek confirmed. The atmosphere shifted immediately. It was subtle but unmistakable. Officer Chen's expression changed from neutral professionalism to something more like recognition and respect. Officer Rodriguez actually smiled for the first time since arriving. "You're an assistant district attorney?" Chen asked. "I am." Linda's confident smirk faltered. "What does that have to do with anything?" Officer Rodriguez handed Derek his license back. "We've worked with you on several cases, sir. The Henderson robbery last year? You were the prosecutor on that?" Derek nodded. "That's right. You testified. You did a great job on the stand, by the way. The defense attorney couldn't shake your testimony." "Appreciate that," Rodriguez said. "That was a tough case." Chen was looking at Linda now, and his expression had shifted from patient to slightly annoyed. "Ma'am, did you realize you called the police on a member of the district attorney's office?" "I don't care if he's the governor," Linda sputtered. "He's still breaking HOA rules, which, as we've explained, is not a police matter," Rodriguez said, his tone much firmer now. "And frankly, ma'am, calling 911 for something like this is a misuse of emergency services. This is an emergency. He's violating our neighborhood standards." No, ma'am, it's not, Chen said. An emergency is a threat to life or property. This is a garage sale. You've wasted police resources and our time on what amounts to a personal dispute. Derek stood there, watching Linda's face go through a range of emotions. Confusion, anger, embarrassment, and finally something that might have been fear. She was starting to realize this hadn't gone the way she'd expected. I want to be clear about something, Officer Rodriguez said, and now he was pulling out his notepad again. Filing a false police report is a crime, so is making frivolous emergency calls. We're going to note this incident in our report. False report? Linda's voice went up an octave. I didn't file a false report. There is a problem here. There's a garage sale, Chen corrected, which is completely legal. You called 911 and reported an illegal commercial operation and a disturbance of the peace. Neither of those things is happening here. That's a false report, but I thought, what you thought doesn't matter, ma'am. What matters is the actual situation. And you pulled us away from real calls to deal with this. Derek could see Linda starting to panic. Her whole body language changed. The aggressive confidence was gone, replaced by nervous energy. She clutched her folder to her chest like it might protect her. I was just trying to protect the neighborhood, she said, her voice much quieter now. I didn't realize that he was a prosecutor. Rodriguez finished. Would that have changed anything? Linda didn't answer, but her expression said it all. Yes, it would have changed everything. She wouldn't have dreamed of pulling this stunt if she'd known who Derek was. Mrs. Patterson, Officer Chen said, I strongly suggest you familiarize yourself with what actually constitutes an emergency before you call 911 again. And I'd recommend working out your HOA disputes through proper channels instead of wasting police resources. But the rules are between you and your HOA. Rodriguez cut her off. Not us, we're done here. Both officers turned to Derek. Sorry about this, Mr. Thompson, Chen said. You're all clear to continue with your sale. Everything's legal and proper from what we can see. I appreciate you coming out, Derek said. I know you've got better things to do. Part of the job, Rodriguez said with a slight smile. Though this was definitely one of the more interesting calls today. Good luck with the sale. They walked back to their patrol car and Derek watched as they got in and pulled away. A few neighbors who'd been watching from their yards or windows started to drift back inside. The show was over. Linda was still standing there, her folder hanging limply at her side. She looked smaller somehow, deflated. All that aggressive energy had drained out of her. I didn't know, she said quietly. I was just doing my job as a board member. Derek took a breath. He could have rubbed it in, could have made her feel worse about the whole situation. But what was the point? She'd already embarrassed herself in front of the police and the neighbors. Mrs. Patterson, he said, keeping his voice even. Maybe next time check the actual bylaws before you threaten people with fines. And definitely don't call 911 unless there's a real emergency. Linda opened her mouth like she wanted to say something, then closed it again. She turned and walked back across the street to her house, moving much slower than when she'd marched over earlier. Derek watched her go, then turned his attention back to his garage sale. A couple who'd been watching the whole thing from their car finally got out and walked over, grinning. That was amazing, the woman said. We've been wanting to have a garage sale for months, but she keeps telling everyone they can't. Looks like maybe you can after all, Derek said with a tired smile. He still had a lot of stuff to sell. The couple who'd been waiting in their car approached Derek's tables with obvious relief on their faces. The woman immediately started looking through the kitchen items while her husband examined some picture frames. We moved in 2 years ago, the woman said, picking up a set of coffee mugs. First month here. We tried to have a yard sale to get rid of stuff from our old apartment. She showed up with that same folder and shut us down, told us we'd face $1,000 fines if we didn't pack everything up immediately. Did you? Derek asked. The husband nodded. We were terrified. We're first-time homeowners, didn't know any better. Just did what she said, ended up having to haul everything to Goodwill instead. I'm sorry that happened to you, Derek said. Don't be, the woman replied with a grin. Watching her get told off by those cops was worth the 2-year wait. How much for these mugs? Derek ended up selling them the mugs, 3 picture frames, and a small bookshelf. They were still loading things into their trunk when another neighbor walked over. This one was a guy probably in his 60s wearing gardening gloves and carrying pruning shears. Heard the commotion, he said, extending his hand. I'm Robert. Live 4 houses down. Derek shook his hand. Derek, nice to meet you. That woman, Robert said, shaking his head. She's been a problem for years. Ever since she got on that board, she's made it her personal mission to control everything everyone does. You know, she tried to tell me what color I could paint my shutters? Said beige wasn't on the approved color list. Spent 2 hours going through the actual HOA documents with her, proving there was no such list. She backed down eventually, but she wasn't happy about it. Seems like a pattern, Derek observed. Oh, it absolutely is. She's done this to at least a dozen people I know about. Made up rules about when you can water your lawn, what kind of mailbox you can have, whether you can park your car in your own driveway overnight. Most people just give in because they don't want the hassle. A younger woman jogging by stopped when she heard their conversation. She pulled out her earbuds. Are you talking about Linda? From the HOA? Unfortunately, Robert said. Oh my God, I have a story, the woman said, stepping onto Derek's driveway. Last summer, she told me I couldn't have a basketball hoop in my driveway because it was unsightly. Threatened to fine me $300. I took the hoop down because I didn't want trouble. Then I saw my neighbor 3 streets over has had the same exact basketball hoop for 5 years. I asked Linda about it, and she said that was different because that neighbor had been there longer. That doesn't even make sense, Derek said. Nothing she does makes sense, the woman replied. She just likes having power over people. I'm Kelly, by the way. Derek? Well, Derek, thanks for standing up to her. Someone needed to. Kelly jogged off and Robert stayed to browse for a bit. He ended up buying a toolbox and some gardening equipment. As Derek was wrapping everything in newspaper for him, 2 more people approached. They'd clearly been watching from across the street and had been waiting for the right moment to come over. Is it true you're with the district attorney's office? The older of the 2 asked. She was probably in her 70s with bright white hair and kind eyes. I am, Derek confirmed. Oh, thank goodness, she said. I'm Patricia, and this is my son Jason. We've had so many problems with Linda and that HOA board. She fined us $600 last year for having our garbage cans visible from the street. But it was trash day. The trucks were coming in an hour. Where else were we supposed to put them? Did you pay the fine? Derek asked. Patricia looked embarrassed. We did. Jason wanted to fight it, but I was worried they'd put a lien on the house or something. I'm on a fixed income, and I couldn't risk it. Derek felt a surge of anger on her behalf. $600 was a lot of money for anyone, but especially for someone living on a fixed income, and for something as ridiculous as having garbage cans out on trash day. That was absurd. Did you have anything in writing about the fine? Derek asked. Any documentation? Oh yes, Patricia said. I kept everything. Letters, emails, the whole thing. I keep good records. You might want to hold on to those, Derek suggested. I have a feeling things are going to change around here. Patricia's eyes lit up with hope. Really, you think so? I think Mrs. Patterson has been getting away with this stuff because nobody's pushed back hard enough. But there are laws about what HOAs can and can't do, and making up rules on the spot isn't legal. Jason, who'd been quiet up until now, spoke up. Would you be willing to look at some of the documentation? Not as a lawyer, I know you're not our lawyer or anything, but just to tell us if you think we have any grounds to challenge some of this stuff. Derek hesitated. He had to be careful here. He couldn't give legal advice to neighbors in an informal setting like this. But he could point them in the right direction. I can't give you legal advice, he said carefully, but I can tell you that if you think the HOA is acting outside its authority, you have options. You can request to see the meeting minutes where rules were voted on. You can challenge fines through the dispute resolution process that should be outlined in your bylaws. And if the HOA is violating its own governing documents, you can potentially take legal action. We wouldn't know where to start, Patricia said. Start with documentation, Derek advised. Keep records of everything. Every interaction, every letter, every email. Then maybe consult with an attorney who specializes in HOA law. There are lawyers who do free consultations. They thanked him profusely and ended up buying a few small items before leaving. As they walked away, Derek noticed more neighbors were out now. Some were in their yards, some were on their porches, and a few were walking by slowly, clearly curious about what had happened but too shy to approach. The rest of the afternoon was busy. Word had apparently spread about the confrontation with Linda and the police, and people seemed eager to support Derek's sale. Some bought things they probably didn't need. Others just stopped by to introduce themselves and share their own Linda stories. It was like the whole neighborhood had been waiting for someone to stand up to her. And now that someone had, they all wanted to be part of it. Around 3 o'clock, a man in his 40s approached with a notepad. He had that look of someone official, and Derek immediately wondered if this was another problem coming his way. "Afternoon," the man said. "I'm Brian Wheeler. I'm actually on the HOA board with Linda." Derek tensed. "Okay." "I heard about what happened this morning," Brian continued. "Several neighbors called me. I wanted to come by and apologize on behalf of the board. Linda was completely out of line." That wasn't what Derek had expected to hear. "Oh, well, thank you." "The thing is," Brian said, looking uncomfortable, "this isn't the first time she's done something like this. She's very enthusiastic about enforcement, but she has a tendency to enforce rules that don't actually exist. The board has talked to her about it before, but she doesn't seem to get the message. Has the board considered removing her?" Derek asked. Brian sighed. "It's complicated. She's been there a long time, and she does a lot of work for the community. Organizes events, maintains the neighborhood directory, that kind of thing. But yeah, we've discussed it. Today's incident might be the final straw, honestly. Calling the police on a resident over a garage sale? That's embarrassing for all of us." "For what it's worth," Derek said, "I did check the bylaws before I set this up. There's nothing in there about garage sales needing approval." "I know," Brian said. "I went home and checked after I heard what happened. You're absolutely right. Linda made up that rule. Or maybe she misremembered something from a board discussion that never got voted on. Either way, she had no right to threaten you with fines or call the police. I appreciate you telling me that." "There's going to be an emergency board meeting next week," Brian said. "Would you be willing to attend? I think the board needs to hear directly from you what happened. And honestly, we need to address this pattern of behavior before someone actually does file a lawsuit against the HOA." Derek considered it. Part of him wanted to just let it go. He'd stood his ground, sold his stuff, and everything had worked out fine. Did he really want to get more involved in HOA drama? But then he thought about Patricia, worried about losing her house over a $600 fine for taking out her trash. He thought about the young couple who'd been scared into canceling their garage sale. He thought about all the other people Linda had probably bullied over the years with her made-up rules and threats. "Yeah," Derek said. "I'll be there." Brian looked relieved. "Thank you. I'll email you the details. Your contact information should be in the HOA directory." After Brian left, Derek stood there for a moment looking at what remained of his sale items. About half of everything was gone, which was better than he'd expected given the morning's drama. The sun was starting to angle lower in the sky and he was tired. It had been a long day. But as he looked around at his neighborhood, really looked at it for the first time since moving in, he felt something shift. This was his community now. These were his neighbors, and maybe, just maybe, he could help make it a better place to live. He started packing up the remaining items, already thinking about what he'd say at that board meeting. Linda Patterson had picked the wrong person to mess with. Not because he was a prosecutor, but because he was someone who actually read the rules and wasn't afraid to stand up when someone broke them. This wasn't over. Not by a long shot. The following Tuesday evening, Derek walked into the community center conference room at exactly 7 o'clock. He'd expected maybe a handful of board members sitting around a table. What he found instead was at least 40 people crammed into a space meant for 20, neighbors he'd met at the garage sale, others he'd only seen in passing, and a few he didn't recognize at all. They'd all shown up. Brian was at the front looking slightly overwhelmed. There were 4 other board members with him, including Linda, who sat at the far end of the table with her arms crossed and her jaw set tight. She didn't look at Derek when he walked in. Didn't look at anyone, actually. Just stared straight ahead like she was trying to pretend none of this was happening. "Wow," Brian said, surveying the crowd. "Okay, this is a lot more people than I expected. We might need to move to the bigger room." "This is fine," someone called out. "We can stand." "All right then," Brian said, though he still looked uncomfortable. "Let's go ahead and get started. This is an emergency session of the HOA board, called to address concerns about enforcement procedures and board member conduct. For those who don't know me, I'm Brian Wheeler, board president. With me are board members Carol Jennings, Thomas Wu, Rachel Foster, and Linda Patterson. There was an audible murmur when Linda's name was mentioned. Derek noticed several people exchanging glances. We've invited Derek Thompson to speak about an incident that occurred last Saturday, Brian continued. Derek, would you like to come up front? Derek made his way through the crowded room. Someone handed him a bottle of water and he nodded his thanks. He'd spent the past few days thinking about what he wanted to say. He'd even made some notes on his phone. But standing there looking at all these faces, he realized he didn't need notes. He just needed to tell the truth. Thanks for having me, Derek started. For those who don't know, I moved into the neighborhood about 8 months ago. Last Saturday, I held a garage sale to clear out items from my late mother's estate. I'd done my homework beforehand, checked the county regulations, read through the HOA bylaws, made sure everything I was doing was legal and proper. He paused, taking a sip of water. Around mid-morning, Mrs. Patterson came to my driveway and told me I was in violation of HOA rules. She said I needed advance permission from the board, submitted 30 days prior to hold a garage sale. She threatened me with fines of $500 per day if I didn't shut down immediately. Linda shifted in her seat but didn't speak. I told her I'd read the bylaws and didn't see any such requirement, Derek continued. I asked her to show me where it was written. She couldn't. But she insisted she was right and that I needed to stop. When I refused, she called 911 and reported me for running an illegal commercial operation. Several people in the crowd shook their heads. One man muttered something that sounded like ridiculous. The police came, Derek said. They investigated. They confirmed I wasn't violating any laws or ordinances. They also told Mrs. Patterson that calling 911 for something like this was a misuse of emergency resources and could potentially be considered filing a false report. Brian was nodding along. The other board members looked increasingly uncomfortable. Linda's face had gone red, but she kept staring straight ahead. Now here's the thing, Derek said. This isn't just about me. Since Saturday, I've had at least a dozen neighbors come to me with similar stories. Made-up rules about garbage cans, mailboxes, basketball hoops, paint colors, fines for violations that don't actually exist in the bylaws. People being threatened and intimidated into compliance with rules that were never voted on by this board. Patricia stood up from her seat in the back. I was fined $600 for having my garbage cans visible on trash day. Trash day? When the trucks were coming. She told us we couldn't have a garage sale 2 years ago, the young woman Derek had met called out. We were first-time homeowners and didn't know better. We just believed her. More voices joined in, people sharing their own experiences. Brian held up his hands, trying to restore order. Okay, let's have one conversation at a time here, he said. I hear you all, and these are exactly the kinds of concerns we need to address. Derek, thank you for laying that out. Does anyone on the board have questions? Thomas Wu, an Asian man probably in his 50s, raised his hand. Derek, you mentioned you read through the bylaws. Did you find any mention of garage sale restrictions? None whatsoever, Derek replied. I went through the entire document twice. There's a section about home-based businesses requiring approval, but a one-time garage sale of personal items doesn't qualify as a business. That's because the rule is in the supplementary guidelines, Linda said suddenly, speaking for the first time. Her voice was defensive and sharp. Not everyone reads those. What supplementary guidelines? Brian asked, turning to her. The ones we discussed at the board meeting 3 years ago, Linda said. Carol Jennings, a woman with short gray hair, frowned. Linda, we discussed a lot of things at that meeting, but we never voted to implement any garage sale restrictions. I remember because I specifically said we shouldn't regulate that. Well, we should have, Linda snapped. Garage sales decrease property values. They bring in strangers. They create traffic problems. That's not the point, Brian said firmly. The point is whether or not there's an actual rule. And from what Derek and Carol are saying, there isn't one. I've been on this board for 12 years, Linda said, her voice rising. I think I know what our rules are. Knowing them and making them up are two different things, Thomas said quietly. The room went silent. Linda's face went from red to almost purple. How dare you suggest I'm making things up? Everything I do is for this community. I volunteer countless hours. I organize events. I keep this neighborhood running smoothly. By harassing people, someone called from the crowd. I don't harass anyone, Linda shot back. I enforce the rules. Rules that don't exist, Patricia shouted. The room erupted into overlapping voices, everyone trying to talk at once. Brian banged his hand on the table like a gavel. Everyone, please. We need to maintain order here. He turned to Linda. Linda, I think we need to have a serious conversation about your role on this board. This isn't the first time concerns have been raised about your enforcement methods, and the fact that you called the police on a resident for illegal garage sale is, frankly, unacceptable. I was protecting our community standards, Linda said, but her voice had lost its confidence. She sounded defensive now, almost desperate. You were abusing your position, Rachel Foster said. She'd been quiet until now, but when she spoke, her voice was firm. I've been hearing complaints about you for 2 years. I should have spoken up sooner, but I didn't want to cause conflict. That was wrong of me. This has gone too far. Brian looked at the other board members. I think we need to take a vote. All in favor of removing Linda Patterson from the HOA board effective immediately. 4 hands went up. Only Linda's stayed down. The room burst into applause. Linda stood up abruptly, her chair scraping loudly against the floor. You're all going to regret this, she said, her voice shaking with anger or emotion or both. This neighborhood is going to fall apart without me. You'll see. She grabbed her folder and her purse and marched out of the room. The door slammed behind her with a bang that made several people jump. There was a moment of stunned silence, and then someone started clapping again. Soon the whole room joined in. Brian waited for the applause to die down. All right, so that happened. I want to apologize to everyone here who's been affected by this situation. The board is going to conduct a full review of all fines issued in the past 3 years. If anyone believes they were fined improperly, please submit your documentation to me and we'll review it. Any fines that were based on non-existent rules will be refunded. What about interest? Someone asked. Brian looked pained. We'll figure something out. I can't promise anything specific right now, but we'll try to make this right. The meeting continued for another hour, with people sharing concerns and the board taking notes. Derek answered questions about what residents' rights were, and how HOA boards were supposed to operate within legal boundaries. He was careful not to give specific legal advice, but he could provide general information, and that's what people needed. When the meeting finally ended, Derek was swarmed by neighbors wanting to thank him. Patricia hugged him, tears in her eyes. You have no idea what this means, she said. I've been so stressed about that fine. I thought I might have to take out a loan. Keep your documentation, Derek reminded her. Make sure you submit everything to Brian. As the crowd thinned out, Brian approached Derek. Thank you for doing this. I know you could have just let it go. I thought about it, Derek admitted. But it wasn't just about me. It was about everyone she'd pushed around. Well, you did this community a real service, Brian said. And hey, if you ever want to join the board, we're going to have an opening now. He said it with a slight smile. Derek laughed. I'll think about it. Maybe once I get more settled. He walked home in the cool evening air, feeling lighter than he had in months. His garage sale had been a success despite the drama. He'd cleared out most of his mother's things, met his neighbors, and somehow ended up making a real difference in his community. The next weekend, Derek noticed something as he drove through the neighborhood. 3 different houses had garage sale signs out. People weren't afraid anymore. They were reclaiming their right to do normal things in their own homes without fear of being harassed. He smiled to himself. His mom would have loved this story. She'd always taught him to stand up for what was right, even when it was uncomfortable, especially when it was uncomfortable. 2 months later, Derek got a check in the mail from the HOA. It was Patricia's $600 fine, refunded in full with an additional $50 for inconvenience and distress. He walked over to her house and handed her the check personally. The look on her face made everything worth it. Linda had been right about one thing. The neighborhood did change after she left, but it didn't fall apart. It got better. People felt free to actually live their lives without looking over their shoulders. The board started operating more transparently, with meeting minutes posted online and clear documentation of all actual rules. And Derek learned something important. Sometimes standing your ground isn't about being confrontational. It's about knowing your rights, staying calm, and refusing to be bullied. The law was on his side because he'd done his homework. The community was on his side because he'd stood up not just for himself but for everyone. He never saw Linda at another neighborhood event. Word was she kept to herself now, rarely leaving her house. Part of him felt bad about that. But mostly he felt relieved. Everyone deserved to live in a community where the rules were fair and applied equally. Where board members served the residents, not the other way around. His mother's estate was finally settled. The house was sold, the belongings distributed or donated. It had been a hard few months dealing with grief and paperwork and all the complicated emotions that came with losing a parent, but in the middle of all that difficulty, he'd found something unexpected. He'd found home.